format is that I give you an address for about 5 minutes, just about the nature of the institution. Then we go up to the hemicycle, that's the Parliament in effect, and the EU civil servant will explain things there. Then we come back down here and I'll give you a slightly longer talk, obviously with questions and answers, and that's all right. My initial talk will be terribly confusing and not very interesting. Oh, I can hear you saying, oh, the usual one then. When people look at the European Union, first of all, they confuse it with a different organisation altogether. And I've seen top journalists do this. There's frequently confusion between the European Union on the one hand and the Council of Europe, which happens to be based in Strasbourg, on the other. The Council of Europe, with its Convention on the Human Rights and Court of Human Rights, is not an EU institution. So if we can get over that confusion to begin with, although, just to be confusing, there is now an affiliation between them, but they are separate organisations. Dealing with the EU, the organisation that we're part of here, there are, make sure I haven't miscounted, 5 different institutions, and people, again, even journalists I've noticed, frequently confuse them. There's the Parliament where we are, which does now take part in making laws. For a long time it didn't, it was just a talking shop. There's the Commission, that's headed by President Barroso. You've heard about him, haven't you? The Portuguese. He was a Maoist, now he's a Conservative. Is there much difference? Then there's the Council, used to be called the Council of Ministers. If you ask me who the president of that is, I'd have to say, well, I'm not terribly sure. The reason I'm not terribly sure is the fact that it changes every 6 months. And it isn't so much a person who wields the presidency as a country. At the moment, Hungary is the president of the Council. Then there's the Court of Justice. The word justice used in its widest possible sense. That's the body that decides disputes between different institutions, but also is ultimately the decider of points of law on cases coming from member countries. Is that? Oh. And then there's a body known as the European Council, so they confuse the Council and the European Council frequently, but they are quite separate bodies. The European Council is made up in the main of heads of government, but occasionally, in the case of France, heads of state. Mr. Forden, do you want to address them first of all, or would you prefer to address them up there?
No, I think if it's okay with you, we can take them up to the gallery.
Yes.
Whenever you like. I mean, we don't have to do it now. Sometime between now and 12:30.
Yes.
Whichever's convenient for you.
And then we can come back down here, and then I can talk to them individually. Yes. What I was just doing just before you arrived was trying to dispel confusion, but probably actually implanting it between the different institutions. I think it was, even in the Independent, one would think a very respected newspaper, that did, on one occasion, the writer of the article admitted that he thought that after the Lisbon Treaty, the rotating presidency of the Council would disappear to be replaced by Mr. Van Rompuy. Obviously, he hadn't realised that the Council of which the rotating presidency, that's Hungary at the moment, is the president, is a quite different organisation from the European Council, of which Herman Van Rompuy is the president. So it really is, to the outsider, it's sort of utterly confusing. Even if we presented you with wonderful pictures and diagrams, I think you'd still go away with these 4 presidents, including the President of Parliament, but rotating around your head. But I think it is important for people who are observers, whether they're admirers of the institutions or perhaps less admiring of them. It's important that everybody understands how they work, and that they don't particularly make confusion between the EU on the one hand and the Council of Europe on the other, although there is an affiliated relationship now, but I've seen television journalists make that confusion before. So I think our own people, especially those who aspire to be on party lists in 3 years' time, need to understand the difference between the institutions institutions, the difference in the composition of them, but also between their functions. What we, I suppose, could do with, ideally, for these trips is a sort of nice little one-sided sheet with all of these institutions and the relationship between them noted. But
well, there is PowerPoint actually.
yes, I know. I'm not sophisticated enough for that. I'm not really very sophisticated enough for anything. But we have seen them before. I don't know whether it's available here. Is it?
Well, I'll bear in mind what you say and see if we can rustle something up.
Oh, it'd be lovely. On a subsequent occasion, because you know, I was explaining just now the difference between the institutions, and I was sort of looking at the thought clouds above their head, and I noticed there was still a little bit of confusion there, which is quite understandable. It is quite confusing. So, do you want us all to go up with you now?
Yes, yes.
And then you can see the Parliament. I'm afraid, one, you won't see it in action, and two, this isn't the main Parliament. There's a Parliament with room for everybody here in Brussels, but the Parliament that we usually use is the one in Strasbourg. We go to Strasbourg for 4 days, 4 consecutive days, about once every 4 weeks. Is it 12 a year, isn't it?
Yes, that's
yes. But every now and again we have what we call a mini plenary, a sort of mini sitting of the Parliament, lasting 2 days, and those are held here in Brussels. So the Parliament you see is a real Parliament, is used, but it's not the one that we use most.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, perhaps
this is Mr. Fordham.
Yes, my name is John Fordham. I'm responsible for British and Irish visits to the European Parliament. So welcome on behalf of the Visitors Service. What we're going to do now is go to the end of this corridor, veer right towards the lifts, and obviously there are far too many of you to get you in the same lift all at once. So if you could go up to the 4th floor and just wait for me outside, I'll probably come up in the last lift, and then I'll accompany you to the public gallery. As Mr. Bronze has just said, there is no plenary session today, therefore I believe that the chamber won't be in use, and that will afford me the opportunity to explain something about voting, seating arrangements, and perhaps languages as well, if there's enough time. Obviously, I don't want to eat into your time more than is necessary. So, towards the end, to the end of this corridor, right towards the lifts, up to the 4th floor, please. And if you wait for me outside there, as soon as we're all assembled on the 4th floor, take you to the gallery.
Yes,
thank you.
Control the seats at the front, please.
Perhaps add, in order to get rid of Strasbourg and Luxembourg, it will be necessary to include it in a new treaty, because the status quo is included in the current treaty, which, as you probably know, is the Treaty of Lisbon. Since it took such a long time to get Lisbon into action, it's going to take even longer to draw up a new treaty. It will take many, many years. I don't know, there's no talk about it on the horizon, so we are stuck with the status quo at the moment. But whatever your position on the EU, almost everybody, you're pro or anti, almost everybody is against the fact of having 3 different places to work, except the French and the Luxembourgers, and to a certain extent the Germans. For historical reasons, they still give a lot of importance to Strasbourg, a symbol of Franco-German reconciliation after the Second World War. Anyway, the situation is that we hold 12 plenaries on average, therefore, once a month. In reality, there's no August plenary, but there is a second plenary, usually in one of the autumn months, to make up the 12, which Parliament is obliged under the treaties to hold down in Strasbourg, and they last a week, though that does include travel time. The plenaries held in Brussels are colloquially called mini sessions because they are short. They are the same in form and importance as Strasbourg sessions, but they're of shorter duration. They last for 2 half days, a Wednesday afternoon and a Thursday morning of actual session. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say. So, although the two chambers look very different, the one down in Strasbourg, I think, is a bit more space-age than this one, is a little more conventional, but seating arrangements are practically identical. Now, I don't know if, at the beginning, I don't know if it's been explained to you, or perhaps you know already, the vast majority of the 736 current MEPs, that will shortly rise under Lisbon to 751. 72 of them, shortly to be 73, represent the United Kingdom, so that's about 1 MEP in 10. All but about 30 of the current MEPs sit in political groups. They don't sit in national groups. You don't get the Brits there and the French there and the Germans there and the Finns there and Greeks and so on. The vast majority of MEPs sit in political groups according to their political affiliations, beliefs, philosophies and so on. And there are 7 political groups in the European Parliament. There is also a group of independent MEPs, which I think is where you sit. They're called non-attached members in-house, but if you prefer the term independent, that's basically what they are. They're called non-attached because they're not attached to any of the 7 official groups. This is because obviously every MEP has a democratic mandate to represent his electorate in the European Parliament, or her electorate in the European Parliament. But Parliament sets a minimum, 2 minimum criteria before a political group could be set up. There have to be at least 25 MEPs of 7 different nationalities. It's no good, I don't know, 3 Portuguese MEPs deciding to create the European Peace and Love Party. You have to have 25 MEPs of 7 different nationalities. Any fewer than that, and you sit as non-attached or independent MEPs. Briefly, the 7 political groups correspond to 7 different ideologies or philosophies in the European Union. The biggest, with about 265, is the centre-right European People's Party, or EPP, where there is no British interest at all, and that's partly because the EPP is overwhelmingly Euro enthusiastic. The second biggest group is the group of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, which is normally abbreviated in-house anyway to the Socialist Group. This is where British Labour MEPs sit. They have about, the group itself have about 180 MEPs in the institution. And it's the only group, if my memory serves me well, can you still hear me? Yes. It's the only group which has MEPs from every single member state sitting in. The next biggest group, with about 85 MEPs, is the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe, the ALDE group, again in-house, normally abbreviated simply to the Liberal group, and this is where British Lib Dem MEPs sit. Now these 3 groups, the centre-right EPP, the centre-left Socialist group and the centrist Liberal group, are the biggest groups in Parliament and always have been historically, and they're the ones which have the greatest clout. For example, they have provided Parliament with all but one of its presidents in its nearly 60-year history. By the way, the European Parliament is the only EU institution of the Council of Ministers, the European Council, the Commission and Parliament. Those are the 4 basic institutions in the European Union. Parliament is the only one which elects its own leader. Twice in every 5-year lifetime, you know that elections take place once every 5 years. At the beginning and halfway through each session, MEPs get together to elect the President of Parliament. The current president, Mr. Jerzy Buzek, was elected at the first plenary session of the newly elected parliament, July 2009, and unless anything unexpected or untoward happens, he will remain as president until January 2012.